opponents will ultimately always appeal to delta X. That would be the gas pressure gradient. And say, well, we've got a dynamic system here. And as Brian's detailed, go through all of the convection currents or the water cycle and describe how that process is a dynamic process. And you go, yeah, that's fascinating. So we've got a gas pressure gradient. But how do you get the gas pressure in the first place to have the delta of gas pressure? Well, you wouldn't achieve the gas pressure in the first place for it to develop into a dynamic system if you didn't have containment.
I don't know. Let me read this to you real quick. I wanted to read this last week, but this tells you where we're at with them. This is from the Washington Post. And it starts out, the weather helps disprove the flat earth hypothesis. Okay? Goes on to say, this is how it starts out. The earth is round, period. It may seem like an obvious fact that we've understood since primary school, but for a body of flat earthers, the concept of a globe-shaped earth is paramount to what they claim, this is flat earthers, is the biggest conspiracy theory ever to exist. Their science is laughable, their evidence baseless, and their claims prone to falling flat, pun intended. But that hasn't stopped flat earthers from devoting a lot of effort to a cause that lacks dimension. Okay? Then it goes on to say that the weather disproves flat earth. You would be crushed to death because the way gravity works, which we all encounter in our daily lives, every molecule of air would be drawn to the Earth's center of mass. Because the Earth is a globe, notice that, right? Because the Earth is a globe, this means the atmosphere settles around the Earth, pulled toward Earth's center, but is stopped by the Earth's surface. The air pressure depends on height through a relationship known as hydrostatic balance. But in most places where we live, the air pressure is within tolerable limits. But if Earth were flat, a disproportionately large chunk of the air would be drawn toward the center of the disk that flat earthers believe in. Air pressure would range from near zero or no atmosphere at the edge of the disk to massive values toward the middle, So if you lived in, say, Australia or southern South America, you'd probably suffocate from a deficit of oxygen. And if you live too close to the North Pole, you'd end up getting crushed by the weight of the atmosphere. I mean, it's a joke. Who believes this?
Who's the author?
About rain and
Who's
hail.
the author?
It's the Washington Post. Let me see the guy's name. Washington Post. It says Capital Weather Gang by Matthew Cappucci. Oh, God, he's got to be Italian. What the freak?
So, Matthew Cappucci has got a fundamental misunderstanding about a lot of the... Can you pop yourself on mute, Neil? A lot of the things that are described in his model. And the first thing he starts out by doing is just begging the question flat out, Earth is a sphere. All right, so the outrageous claim, as far as we are concerned, is to say that Earth's spherical with antipodal positioning, but you're going to flat out state it at the beginning of your article, and the justification is because you were told so when you were a kid. That's his justification to open with, because we knew since primary school. All right, that's interesting. Then he goes on to do a straw man fallacy in terms of what he says, flat Earth is also a stereotyping fallacy, and he's going to employ a disc-shaped Earth, but then he's going to describe gravity, something that exists only in mathematics, in a fourth dimension, in his heliocentric sphere Earth world. It's not something that exists in reality, let alone on a flat plane. But yet he's going to employ how he believes a conceptual medium known as pseudo-Riemannian force space is going to affect a flat plane. Why would you do such an idiotic thing? Meanwhile, he's talking about how the atmosphere will be affected on his straw man flat plane. that he's decided by stereotyping fallacy we all use as a hypothesis. Clearly doesn't understand what science is either. Number one, if you're going to claim we've got a hypothesis, what was our hypothesis? Who was it that presented it? And why is it that you're asserting that every single flat earther adheres to this quasi-hypothesis, which no one has offered? Meanwhile, you're asserting begging the question fallacy after begging the question fallacy on top of a strawman fallacy disk model with a begging the question atmosphere, sphere-shaped air affected by gravity, fourth-dimensional space-time bending on a flat plane strawman that he's holding up to burn in full dichotomy. So it's riddled with fallacy and shows a very poor understanding of not only his own model, but the stereotype that he's employing when he superimposes his own misunderstandings about sphere-shaped air and how gravity affects it. All right. So a vector towards the centre of a sphere Earth, centre of mass 1 in gravity. All right. So what about the fact that gas doesn't behave like that and it actually expands in all directions to fill the availability of volume it has to fill, in line with the second law of thermodynamics description of entropy? Why would it be that you would say that gravity, which is merely conceptual, is actually flying in the face of entropy, which is a law of nature? Gas fills space. But you've got a space sphere and a presupposition that that's automatically the case, and we've got the outrageous claim with the flat plane that you also deal with on a daily basis. Yeah, it's just an outrage from a Dumbo.
Yes, that's correct. And you know what the funny thing is? He says our science is laughable. First of all, we don't claim no science, correct? We've never claimed science.
No, not correct. Where science is useful is where we've cited it. So if you want to cite the double-slit experiment, that's absolutely a scientific claim that we're making. Quantum Eraser's namesake is after a scientific experiment. So you want to tell us that our experiments, well, what do you mean? The ones that are well-published and empirically validated by way of systematic experimentation based on, what was that, hypothesis? Yeah, you used that word, didn't you, dick? You haven't got a clue what that word means, though, do you? But you're going to go throwing it into your article like you're intelligent. Yeah, we'll make sure we get his name again. Washington Post, who was the guy? We'll put it in the title. I'll trim this out.
Matthew Cappucci. I'm talking about science to declare the nature of Earth. Like, it falls outside of science, correct? I thought that's what we've always said.
Yeah, it falls outside of scientific inquiry, which is about cause and effect relationships. Phenomena that you want to know what the cause of is? Well, that would be DV-IV relationships, dependent variable phenomena that you're trying to study, and independent variable presumed cause of the effect being varied to see if you can cause it. That's hypothesis actualization. Just for you, Matthew, because you haven't got a clue what that means.
Yeah, they bring up the guy that died in the rocket with Mad Mike. They bring that up. It's laughable, the whole thing. If you continue on, you really would get very frustrated.
Spell his name for me, just so we can get it correct in the title.
Okay. Matthew Cappucci, C-A-P. Hold on, where is it? C-A-P. C-A-P-P-U-C-C-I.
C-A-P-P-U-C-C-I.
Correct.
Okay, Matthew Cappucci. Publish this with your name and Washington Post in the title.
Yeah, they're very crafty because later on in the article, he starts talking about what we claim the sun is and how big it is and how he crunched the numbers. You know, it's certain speech that they use. Well, I've crunched the numbers, and this is what I come up with. I mean, it's a joke.
It's just a bullshitter. Crunch the numbers? Well, when you were crunching the numbers for the distance to the sun that presumably you're quoting as us having as 4,000 miles or there or thereabouts, well, you do appreciate that triangulation measurement is then utilised with an insertion of an R value based on your spherical presupposition to further move that calculation out to the distance that you have to your sun at 93 million miles. That's based on an R value insertion to the very thing that he will be claiming, if he's quoting a distance that flat earthers give, actually the origin of his triangulation and R value insertion to give him his distance to his sun. So you want to take it that that's wrong? Well, considering there's an R value being inserted to it after the fact, why would it be wrong? When your spherical maths also relies on the exact same triangulation to the sun, only to insert R after the fact. Well, obviously we've got a curved earth beneath us, so we're going to have to factor that in afterwards, after being necessitated to measure on a flat plane, for you and us on a flat plane and you on a sphere. So it makes absolutely no difference if this guy wants to poo-poo the straw man claim that some flat earthers might make, certainly not us. We would say, no, you can't triangulate something that's not physical, that you can't verify. You don't know how big it is. No, I'm afraid not. Now, while it will be utilised and has been and is utilised as a static ceiling height to get triangulation measurements to move around the flat plane that we're actually on, that won't ever change. We're constantly covering that at the moment with the sextant. Well, that fact is then pushed forwards to insert your R belief, your radius value, to give you your maths. So I wouldn't go around poo-pooing it too much, my friend. Again, crunching the numbers, did you notice the R value in your numbers there, Matthew? Yeah, that R value's been debunked. If the Earth was a sphere with a radius of 3959 miles, then every distance to the horizon, that would be your Earth curve edge, could be no more than 1.2 times the square root of the observer's height in feet. And we have imagery called the Black Swan that shows beyond all certitude that the horizon is beyond those geometric limitations at a radius value of 3959. Therefore, A, the horizon is not Earth curve, and B, the Earth is not a sphere.
Afternoon. All right, Nathan. Hey, Neil. You all right, bro?
We're talking about a Washington Post article by a guy called Matthew Cappucci, where he uses some lame-ass arguments, inserts R, begs the question on 3 separate occasions by way of just demanding that we beg the question right at the beginning of his assertion, holds up a load of strawman fallacies with disc-shaped Earth, with gravity being applied to them, and atmosphere sphere-shaped air wrapped around them, so he can then pull them apart, along with his claims of distance to the sun measurements by way of presumably triangulation, although Neil didn't mention that. He just said he crunched the numbers. Your field, right, Adam?
Reminds me of old school crap now. How would gravity work on a pizza disc? Yeah, so...
Yeah, that's basically what he's saying. Yeah, you're right, Adam.
Let's assume gravity is what we say it is first and foremost, and then put it on a thing that wouldn't generate the gravity that we have assumed it would be generating it. Then we'll pull that apart and laugh at you. Get on, you jokers. Yeah, so many of those.
You know, it's justification for being on a sphere. Obviously, we're on a sphere, he starts the article with. Do you know what his justification was? Because we were taught it from a very early age. That was his reasoning. I'll just read out my message. I dropped Matthew Cappucci a line. So, dear Mr. Cappucci, your article in the Washington Post was put under my nose, regards Flat Earth. We discussed the article and pulled it apart based on various straw men begging the question and false dichotomy fallacies you used. The show is called Flat Earth Debate Uncut and After Show 1482, Matthew Cappucci, if you are interested in hearing a response. Thanks for covering the subject, as it was very useful to pull apart for an audience.
Well, that's pretty fair statement, and hopefully he'll respond.
I don't really want a response from him. I just thought if somebody made a video about me rather than me having to seek it out, if they just let me know in a polite manner, often I will watch it. If, you know, I don't expect him to watch it. It doesn't have to do anything, obviously, but it's nice to know if somebody does make a response to something you've done that's public. If it's put under your nose, you then can think, I don't care. Or, oh, I'll watch that and maybe respond to it. But he's got the choice, right?
Yeah, that's the paper trail you created, and hopefully he'll come on and say, where did I do that?
Did you link it for him, Nathan, in the comments? Or in
We're
the
recording
email?
it right now, Brian, so no.
Oh, sorry.
No, I can't link it until it's uploaded, and we're currently making it.
Maybe he can come here and crunch the numbers with us.
Well,
By the time people are listening, you can.
Well, hold on. Chocolate picked up on what's going on. We are very similar mindsets, you and I, Chocolate. It's unreal sometimes. Precisely, right? If you did happen to get back in touch now, I'd say, well, actually, the show that you've been discussed on, we're literally recording right now. Would you like to join us? So you never know your luck. Unlikely, but that's why I took the time to, you know, that's why I lost track of what you were talking about when you were talking about conspiracy cats. Because I was literally in the process of making a thumbnail with his face on it. I'm like, well, I'm in his Facebook. He's got a messenger that I'm allowed to use. Why not?
His curiosity is going to get the best of him.
I doubt it. He's a meteorologist who just found the subject interesting and thought that what he is directly connected with and has an expertise in, which is weather, is useful for proving that we have a sky vacuum. I don't really think so. Well, obviously, if you're deluded in the idea that you've got a sphere beneath your feet, regardless of what anyone thought, because you were told at 4, then ultimately speaking, you can then correlate anything to do with anything with that belief. And that's precisely what he's done with his expert field. I do weather. Well, weather proves you're on a sphere, right? Well, because I was told at 4, therefore weather is on a sphere. Obviously.
Well, the thing about it
I'd
is
love
that
to ask him about his winds and how many directions the winds. Like, I don't know how long he's been doing weather, but I'm sure he's reported winds going in all types of directions. Very curious to hear what he would say when told that some people think that all the air is moving lockstep with this imaginary ball that he thinks it lives on.
No, don't do that. Don't poison him. So, quite the contrary. The sphere Earth asserts that we turn underneath a second reference frame. So that would be Earth turning underneath things travelling through the air and weather. Now that effect is not actual, i.e. the Coriolis effect is only observed as we turn beneath stuff. So we see apparent deflection, that would be not actual deflection, in, for example, things travelling through a straight path through the air, but appear to drift because we're claimed to turn beneath them. That's Coriolis deflection as claimed by the globe. Now, we don't actually see that effect. Furthermore, it's claimed by people who don't understand this effect that hurricanes are somehow influence of the Coriolis effect, which is a not actual deflection observed as you turn beneath things. So given that this guy's a meteorologist, I'd like him to explain that if he can. I doubt he can. Explain how it is assumed to be an effect of a turning Earth when we don't observe the actual Coriolis deflection. That's not observed. We are not turning beneath anything. However, you might be able to shed some light on why people think a not actual force, that's Coriolis effect, has anything to do with the spin direction of hurricanes, given that it's only a not actual deflection observed as you turn beneath things. For example, if you throw a ball over a roundabout, as you turn beneath the ball, it looks like it takes a curved path when it actually travels straight. That's Coriolis effect. Nothing to do with winds and hurricanes, but yet it's asserted literally in the BBC, admittedly British Weather Service. They assert exactly that, to do with Coriolis force. And it's not a force. But maybe you can explain that to us as a meteorologist. How somehow an assumption of a turning Earth that gives us no Coriolis effect to observe would have any influence whatsoever on the rotation direction of wind. Feel free to explain that to us, Mr. Meteorologist.
I mean,
I would.
I get all that. I understand that that's actually the globe claim. But what I want to hear is, I want to hear how, obviously he's a weatherman, right? So he's going to go with the globe claim, right? The normal globe claim, not the anti-flat Earth one. What I would like to hear is that transition. Like, how long does somebody debate that point until somebody who did say before, oh, of course it's, the air isn't moving lockstep with the Earth. How long does that transition into, oh, of course the air is moving lockstep with the Earth because we don't see the Coriolis. That's why you can't see it. That's why.
Okay.
Why do you expect to see it?
Okay, now
Because we don't experience weather.
No. I'll take what Chocolate said and turn it into a question, as this specifically is about that dude and his Washington Post article, and he's a meteorologist. So, bearing in mind that it is claimed Earth turns beneath things to cause not actual deflection, which has somehow been associated with the actual spin directions of winds, why is it that we are told by what we call anti-flat earthers, deluded people who still think they're on a sphere even though they've had all the information we provide, they still want to believe that they're on a sphere? They tell us, when we point out that we're not turning underneath anything and we're not exhibiting drift at 15 degrees an hour, they tell us that that's because Earth and atmosphere move as one. So somehow unbonded gases are now velcroed to a moving Earth, to give us no effect to observe. So, Mr. Cappucci, maybe you could explain that to us, because our opponents, that would be anti-flat earthers, tell us there's no effect of Coriolis to observe, because Earth and atmosphere travel as one in violation of the first law of thermodynamics. Amazing that, isn't it? how they would assert that a turning Earth with an increased radius and circumference value for the air to be in lockstep with would mean it'd increase its actual value of energy as it increases in altitude, violating the first law. Well, that's what we're told by our opponents, who we point out we don't have drift to. They tell us it all moves together. Crazy nonsense, hey, Mr. Cappucci. But I'm sure you'll have answers for all of these weather-related issues we face here on the flat plane we dwell atop.
Right, and it's
Well,
a very, can I please? It's a very easy thing to compare, like this situation you just described about the presupposed lockstep motion of air with the sphere, by comparing it to a merry-go-round, right? Especially the bigger ones. So if you sit on the inside of the merry-go-round, then yeah, you will feel spinning, right? But it doesn't really impact you too much. But if you sit on the outer edge of that wheel, the same spin will, like, you will be flying through the air. You will be feeling the air rushing past you compared to on the inside because of the rotation around the center point, right? It's very easy to overlook just looking upward in the sky and saying, oh, this part is too small of the supposed globe Earth, that you don't really see it. But effectively, in a circular situation with a spin, everything to the outside has to move a lot faster the further away from the center it is. And that's just how it is.
Also, I'd like to know how we achieve gas pressure. Again, something that your specific field is very much interested in. You even detailed pressure in the article. How can we achieve gas pressure in the first instance without containment? So imagine your belief, Matthew Cappucci, of the birth of Earth with no gas whatsoever. How did it develop gas pressure in a sky vacuum, an ever-expanding, infinite vacuum? How would Earth develop gas pressure in the first place to then go on to develop complex dynamic systems such as weather? Where did we get the gas pressure from in the first place if the sky is a vacuum? Or, to put it in the form that we ask daily, how can we have gas pressure without a container, Mr. Cappucci, meteorologist?
You could include the Earth in there, because then you say, how did we have the gas? Well, the Earth was once a whole bunch of pieces, right? Let's include that too. How did it all come together?
I know he already gave a presuppositional answer in his article when he begged the question of an atmosphere, a sphere-shaped air. Just so he knows before he potentially begs the question of atmosphere again and starts describing how atmosphere works. Sphere. So you're assuming air takes the shape of a sphere then without containment? Oh, definitely not. I'll just correct that part of Mr. Cappucci's crap in his article now. So, Mr. Cappucci, you assume an oxymoron, do you? Sphere-shaped air? No, air definitely doesn't take shapes. It takes the shape of its containment. It's definitely not in a sphere shape by way of an atmospheric assumption you use in your article. Air is not sphere-shaped. So describing air as being sphere-shaped is complete nonsense when gas takes the shape of its container. So back to the original question. Given that Earth, in your heliocentric delusion, has no containment, and gravity would be the bending of a conceptual medium known as space-time, how the hell have we got gas pressure here if you believe the sky is a vacuum? That would be an area of volume that the gas could fill, and gas expands in all directions. It does not go down 9.8 metres per second, in line with a 106-year out-of-date idea of gravity, pulling gas, which in fact expands in all directions.
Can I put
I have to say something now.
Okay, you go first.
I'm after holding back about 5 or 6 times. Yeah. Remember I made a presentation on what causes or what creates our gas pressure gradient. Well, there's a lot of, that's what I was going to say. I was going to bring up, rather than talking about the supposed rotation, it's the pressure. He works with high pressure and low pressure all the time. Now, what creates, he's claiming gravity, right? So what creates the high and low pressures? What is the necessary antecedent for this high and low pressure? That's where I want to start with.
A container.
Go ahead, Brian.
Thank you. he's not going to say, because it's not going to pop into his head, container, right? What he has to say, right? What he has to say is temperature. He has no way out of it, right? If he tries to claim anything but temperature, then he's talking a load of rubbish, and he has a professional career to back up. Temperature creates gas pressure gradients and creates different pressures, high and low pressures. Temperature causes this because temperature causes convection. So the next thing is, well, how is temperature created? And he's got to go on then, he's going to have to talk about what creates temperature. It's the sun heating the earth, and the heat of the earth then heats the gases, and he'll start telling us about this, that, and he might bring convection into it. Right, that's great. Right. So how is that heat created without a container? How is these temperature changes created without a container?
Nothing.
And he'll have to say, well, it heats the surface and it heats the gases. The gases. How do we have gases at pressure without a container? How do you have temperature without a container? How do you have a claimed vacuum without a container?
You can't have anything without a container.
Correct.
Yeah, but this is the thing. We do have a low-grade vacuum up high. We do have temperature. We do have gas pressure, a gas pressure gradient. So his whole claim of gravity, I'm taking out his claim of gravity first and foremost, because that's the thing that's what he said in his article. He threw gravity in. That was his main thing. So I'm taking that away straight away.
Can I now put my scoop of extra heliocentric weirdness on top of all of this?
Go ahead,
I'll try to keep it short, right? But there's another dilemma, like even within the heliocentric conception of how the Earth was formed. Basically, the Big Bang, boom, plasma energy everywhere. It cools off. Then dust forms, it kind of gathers supposedly, and this is even before the Theia situation. Right, so if gas pressure is created on the surface of Earth, right, through materials that are basically releasing the gas, that are chemically releasing the gas, how could they have ever formed, gathered within material, bound to the material in dust, within the middle of a vacuum, gathered together in order to start producing the gas there?
All of these principles, Arwin and Brian's, work off the same exact thing, which is to say that our opponents will ultimately always appeal to delta X. That would be the gas pressure gradient. And say, well, we've got a dynamic system here. And as Brian's detailed, go through all of the convection currents or the water cycle and describe how that process is a dynamic process. And you go, yeah, that's fascinating. So we've got a gas pressure gradient. But how do you get the gas pressure in the first place to have the delta of gas pressure? Well, you wouldn't achieve the gas pressure in the first place for it to develop into a dynamic system if you didn't have containment. First the containment, then the gas pressure, then the gas pressure gradient. So they just appeal to delta X in every single example when they're trying to rebut the question, how can you have gas pressure without a container? Answer, well, we have a gas pressure gradient. Delta X. Like, yeah, you still haven't achieved X without a container.
Right, they really like to fantasize how that one side of the gradient spectrum within the known realm leads on forever into an endless vacuum. They really like fantasizing about that.
It's the second law of thermodynamics violation.